Welcome, everyone. This is the third episode of the authors and their favorite books on Fantasy Book Critic. My name is Mihir Wanchoo, and today joining me is one of our favorite authors, M.D Presley. He is one of our SPFBO semifinalists with his book, The Ring, and today he's gladly joined us. And so, Matthew, welcome. Thank you again for your time today. Do you want to introduce yourself to your readers?
Hey, I'm Matt. M.D Presley is what I write under. I've got a series of world building books. You should always have your book nearby, right? And it should always have a high gloss color so that you can't see it at all when they hold it up. And I'm re-releasing Frontline Fantasy. The Woven Ring, as Mihir mentioned, should be coming out again real soon. And I am a sometimes screenwriter, all the time stay-at-home dad, and yeah, I'm here to talk about one of my favorite series of all time. Should I just jump into it with that one, or is that a good? All right, good. And that's Sandman by Neil Gaiman. It's a big favorite of mine. Of course, the lights, Sandman, wonderful series. Yeah, it is, in my opinion, the finest thing he's done, and I know he's done a lot of stuff since then. And it's been a huge influence on me, and I will jump at any chance to discuss it with anyone, even if they aren't really ready for it.
Well, thank you for that, Matt. And for those viewers of ours, the MD is kind of downplaying himself. He has written a very critically acclaimed Soul's Harvest series. The 4-book series, 3 books were out, and he's going to republish them with new covers, and they're going to be out this year, and hopefully we'll get to read the conclusion, because all of us at Fantasy Book Critic are waiting with bated breath. He's also the author of the Forging Fantasy Realms non-fiction books about writing fiction, which is pretty awesome if you ask me. Dirk Ashton loves them too, as do several of the indie authors, so please do check them out. We'll be adding the links. And Matt, since you mentioned Neil Gaiman's Sandman, I believe it was first published by DC Comics in 1989. Since then, it has gone on, it has been republished under their Vertigo label, as well as now recently the DC Black label as well. Yeah, I believe it ran on for 75 issues. Just in a quick nutshell, what makes it so special for you?
Well, there's 2 parts of that. One, that it is just technically brilliant. It is exceptional. It is epic urban fantasy, and that's kind of the closest I can use to describe it, because it is urban in that, it was modern, it was taking place, but it has tendrils reaching back into, cultures. Like, one of the most famous ones, right, I think he won the Hugo for, was, about Shakespeare and Midsummer Night's Dream. And, so it's spanning that far back, and it's cross-cultural. It, brings in the story of Baghdad, African myth, Japanese myth. It just brings in everything. It's all encompassing. And yet at its heart, it's about a angsty young man who just happens to be billions of years old, and just absolutely fascinating. It was just so unlike anything else at the time. Second answer is that it, was a story about an angsty pale young man who, an angsty pale young man was reading it at the time, and it just touched something special in me. And so it was a massive influence on me as a writer and a person. Wow.
That's definitely a lot to go on. And since you mentioned, it encompassed so many things and different facets of it as well. I believe the comic, since then, has also been described as a mixture of fantasy, horror, ironic humor. And I believe it was definitely unlike anything that was being published in the comics. I know at that time, Frank Miller had just, a few years ago, had come up with his version for Daredevil and the Dark Knight and everything. So the comic books are slowly taking a turn on the grittier side. But for this series, it was not gritty per se, but it was just different, like you mentioned, with its artwork, with its long-form storytelling. So were you a fan from the beginning, or did you perhaps get introduced to it a little bit later on?
I got introduced a little bit later on. Just a little point of reference. Alan Moore had started with Swamp Thing. And he was the tip of the spear of the British invasion at the time. And he predated him. He created Constantine. I asked Gaiman one time, it was like, so tell me about Constantine. And he's like, you'll have to talk to, what did I just say? I just blanked on the name entirely.
Alan Moore.
Alan Moore. You'll have to talk to Alan Moore about that. And just go talk to Alan Moore about that real quick. Because because I had no idea, which is to sort of segue into it. I came in later, the comic had been going on for a while. It was at my 17th birthday, just to date myself, and someone gave me a copy of the, like, not even as a gift, just here's a copy that I have of, of Sandman 2, Doll's House, I think it was. And, and I just started looking at it, and then, like, I left my own birthday party to go look, to go read it. And I remember sitting in a doorway, and people were trying to talk, like, shh, like, and it wasn't even the first comic. Like, it was, the second, like, the stories were already going on, and it was just absolutely fascinating. And so I came in early enough. I don't think the series was finished when I got into it, but it wasn't far off. I know at least the first 7 of the graphic novels were out by the time I started, because I only bought the graphic novels. So.
Oh, got it. So that was going to be my next question. Like, were you reading a single issue, or was it like, like a graphic novel arc? So that kind of explains it.
Yeah, I can't do, like, I started on X-Men comics when I was in middle school and high school, and I bought them, and I was buying like 8 comics a week, kind of thing. And it's just, it was unsustainable in the 90s. And, college kid budget. But when I started really getting into Sandman, you just have to wait for the graphic novels. It's just, also, you can't, like, spend 5 minutes, like, maybe 20 minutes a comic and then wait for the next one for a month. Like, I don't have the impulse control for that.
I hear you. It's hard. I know the comic books run on that model, that that it's releasing a comic book every month or maybe every fortnight. But like, now that once you're reading longer form stories, it becomes very hard to just read those few 30 or so pages. And it's not even maybe 30 pages, but it's lesser than that. At least when they've collected the entire arc, or at least part of the first or second arc, I believe you kind of get like not the complete story, but still some form of a proper story, with a proper beginning, middle, and end. And then of course there's the hook for the next part as well.
Yeah. It's binge versus, weekly prestige television. It existed in comics before it existed in TV. Just want to point that out.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. And also, with your scriptwriting background, you would kind of happen to know that as well. Here's another side question. Like, you mentioned that this kind of really invigorated, your reading interest in this series. But did it perhaps also invigorate in you the need to perhaps try out writing in from a film or silver screen angle, or was it just purely from a writing angle for you?
It was just the writing. I mean, it's hard to say. So, like, a lot of filmmakers started adapting comics because it's already laid out for you. That is and I'm totally blanking on the term, but we draw it out before we actually film the scene. So it looks like, so the comics already have it all drawn out. So
the story panels, kind of.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I totally come from the industry, right? I haven't finished my coffee this morning. That's my excuse. I whirled in 5. Like, it's a hard day for me. But yeah, it's storyboarding. Yeah, so the comics are kind of already in between writing and movies to begin with. And I think the comics industry right there was a big time of change in the 90s when these comics were coming out. There was a big shift in films and such as well. So they're all kind of tied up together. And I had no idea that I wanted to be a filmmaker for at least good 4 years after Sandman, until I actually saw a script and said, like, this is the best way to write. Like, I was still trying to do prose at the time. And yeah. I don't know if that actually answered the question.
No, it does. It does. It definitely does, because it kind of like and similar to you, a lot of other not only comic book fans, but also the other writers have kind of pointed out to Neil Gaiman's this seminal on Sandman, because it kind of was like I said before, it was unlike anything that came before. And not only the storytelling, but the artwork kind of complemented, and it was changing, like, because he definitely had different artists accompanying him throughout the series, though I believe the cover art was drawn by the same person, Dave McKean. But after that, you had read through all the 75 issues, what was your thoughts about the artwork that came along with it? Do you have a preference of any artist? Did you love one series of books or like one arc over the other?
Vest, I think is his last name. He did the Midsummer's Night Dream. He also did the Stardust and he has this just gorgeous style that is very, I don't want to say Baroque, but like just detailed, and it's lovely, and it perfectly fit the Midsummer Night's Dream. And so those are some of the most beautiful. But you know, the whoever did the art in The Wake, which was the last one, just the gorgeous colors on that one. And I don't know who the name, and I do like that he often stuck with the same author for an arc. So, and I think he used two in the stories that where the Skiri, where they go into the dream, and it's like Sandman barely shows up for a long time. He just kept alternating between artists. One of them I liked, one of them I didn't. I definitely didn't like the artist, the very square line artist that he used for the Kindly Ones. Like, I didn't like that one at all. It was just, I mean, like the dream, you know, it's so amorphous. I didn't like all the straight lines that they used. So I'm sure that was a conscious choice on his part. It probably very much symbolized the end of something, but you know, did not visually enjoy it.
No, and that's perfectly fine, because as you mentioned, you know, it was a conscious choice, but it didn't necessarily work for you, and it didn't necessarily, you know, you didn't necessarily enjoy it that much as the others. But that's completely fine. I'm pretty sure, you know, other people have their own thoughts.
Yeah. So it's like Sam Keith. He who I've never really enjoyed his style very much, but he did the first run, and even though, or the first several before he left, and I think he has some quote about he felt like he was Jimi Hendrix trying to play in the Beatles, or he thought he was the Beatles trying to play in, you know, with Jimi Hendrix, something like that. But he was so instrumental in the feel of it and the look of all the characters. So I definitely need to give him props, even though, again, not my favorite. But from what he contributed, I definitely need a shout out.
Oh, that's pretty cool. There's, I believe, you know, they kind of are broken down into 10-ish arcs over the entire 75, you know, comic books. Besides the one which you mentioned, you know, where William Shakespeare kind of makes an appearance. And sorry, there's going to be spoilers in this interview. This series has been out now since, what, 1989? So that's 20, 30, close to 30 plus years. There's going to be spoilers. So for those viewers who are offended by it, I'm sorry. So besides the Dream Country arc, which kind of featured, you know, the recollections into the past Victorian era, what was it was that your most favorite arc of the entire series, or were there some others as well?
Oh man, it's you know, what's your favorite kid kind of thing. You know, I only have one kid, so that's pretty lucky on that one. We dodged that bullet as a family. But for each story, like as the horror writing, the Doll's House with the Corinthian, when the Corinthians brought in originally, like that was chilling. And the serial killer convention, like that was horrific. And the right, you know, and even before that, where like where he took a villain, you know, this D-list villain named D, I think, and you know, it has people in the anyway. They had some great horror in there, and he can write some really good horror. And then, you know, just the sadness of the wake and dealing with grief. And so, you know, those are great. The Kindly Ones was just bringing, like, plotting wise, bringing years worth of material and weaving them all back together. So for plotting, the Kindly Ones. Just basic story though, I'm going to go with Seasons of the Mist, which is, you know, getting the key to hell. And this one is definitely my favorite because I don't know if you can see it. I got an autograph there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, this is back before he stopped doing autographs. I think he got too.
Wait.
No, he did. So he got too famous, as I understand it. This is I might be entirely wrong, but I understand that he got too famous, so he couldn't autograph things at conventions or anything anymore, just because like he couldn't do anything else. So that's why every time he flies, he goes to the airport, you know, and signs everything of his in the airport, or some of the things, and then puts out a report about like, this is where, you know, this is where the new ones are. So he'll go and, you know, sign things in bookstores and stuff, but he doesn't give out signatures anymore, I don't think, autographs.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah,
okay.
I think. Yeah.
No, I mean, that's completely I mean, that sounds true, because from what I understand, there was I recall reading about an instance where Neil Gaiman, and this was back in the early 2000s, where he had come to a convention and he was mobbed. And John Scalzi had to kind of, and he, him being British, he was being polite to everybody, and people were just wanting more and more of his time. And John Scalzi had to kind of barge in, grab his hand, and take him out, and kind of be the rude American for the fans, just because there was no way Neil Gaiman was going to let go of people. But I didn't know this because. Oh, but it kind of makes sense, but it's still, I mean, it's a bit sad if you're like a new fan. Like, I'm pretty sure fans are all around, they want their books autographed. There's just like this piece, that holds a special place in their heart and has been signed by the writer who has created that. Oh, but hopefully he, signs enough things, like you mentioned, in the airport or somewhere, so that people can still get it.
Yeah, yeah, it must be nice to be that famous, but it's got to also be hard. Mine has my name in it. I just want to point that out.
I know. I say the words Matthew, and then it's Dream something. I don't know what it says, like Dream On.
It was pretty cool at the time. And I got to hang out with him for a couple of hours, like over the course of a couple of days. And while I was there, I was like, hey, this friend of mine was the one who gave me this comic once, can you sign something for him? But I don't have a comic for him. And and so he like drew Dream on a piece of paper, and it was like, what's your friend's name? And wrote, dear Craig, dream a little. And I handed it off. I haven't seen that guy. In fact, I haven't seen that guy since before then. His mother and my mother went to the same church, and so she delivered it to the mother to deliver to him. Neil Gaiman's signature, personalized. So yeah.
Pretty sure he didn't expect that when he just handed you that comic book. It wasn't even your present, and he got a personalized drawing of Dream from Neil Gaiman, thanks to you.
Yeah, well, it's not thanks to me. It's thanks to Neil Gaiman being really, really incredibly nice. Yeah, very, very British, very, very nice. I at the time I was talking to him, like I was 19, I hadn't finished Sandman. I was asking him questions, and he could have been a jerk about it. And he was so nice and did not hold my ignorance against me. Gently nudged me in the right direction. Like I remember our friend was interviewing him for the tiny school newspaper. And he was like, well, I was a journalist for a while. Like, this is how you should set up your recording device. Like, here, let me show you this kind of thing. And just, yeah.
That's super awesome of him. I've never heard stories about him, being nice, but like this, just to go beyond, just to kind of tell these teenagers who are obviously such adoring fans, and also to help them with the technical side of things. That's pretty cool, man. I don't know what's it about. I'm not disparaging on American authors. I've met plenty cool American authors, but there's like across the Atlantic, the British, the Irish authors, they're just like a special breed in their demeanor.
It was, and it was really, and so it could have been really embarrassing. He really could have been a jerk because like our school was so tiny when he came to speak to us. I mean, like our school was almost smaller than the graduating class of high school. And they were teaching this Jan term. There were 20 students in the class, and it was on comic books, but they called it like sequential art. So I didn't even know to sign up for it, which I would have loved that class, but I didn't know what sequential art was. So so Neil Gaiman was brought in to this tiny college outside of Dallas, like not even in a suburb, like in a tiny town, and you could sign up to go to dinner with him, and no one from the class signed up. No one, not a single person. And so my friend was like, oh yeah, do you like comics, right? Do you know this guy Neil Gaiman? I'm like, yes. Like, well, let's go look at my library real quick. And he's like, oh, like, well, there's a dinner going on. So I went and got me and one other friend who was another fan. Like, we went to the professor. Was like, can we go to dinner with you? So it was the two of us and Neil Gaiman and the professor. And he was so good about it. He was like, I don't know if they explained it to him, but no one wanted to come see him. This was like, mid 90s. So I don't know. It was just, it could have been so embarrassing. He could have thrown a fit, but he was just a dear man, so kind about it. So, yeah.
How, I'm what really makes me curious. I mean, I realize it's in the mid 90s, comic books weren't the big thing that they were since the early 2000s and later on, but still he was kind of famous back then. How did your school managed to finagle that whole thing with him, like the fact that they could they set up a dinner with him? That sounds pretty amazing.
Not the dinner, he stayed for like 3 days at a hotel, and I'd been in that hotel. It was like a motel at best. Like he stayed there to like speak to the school, the class, and the community for like 2 to 3 days. And
holy cow.
Right, yes, I know. And I was so like this memory resurfaced recently, not resurfaced, we were some of my writer friends were talking about, like, wouldn't you be intimidated by having, dinner with Neil Gaiman? I was like, wait, I actually have, like, and it was great. And so, like, I went back to my, like, college's Facebook page. It was like, can anyone find anything on this? Because, like, does anyone remember when Neil Gaiman was there? And people were like, the Neil Gaiman that was at our college? And, like, they found one snippet in the local paper of, like, some writer, some comic book guy comes to the college, I mean, he did give a speech to the community, and some locals came because it supported one comic book store, so the people knew about it from there. But yeah, there were never more than 20 people in the room to see him speak at the time.
Wow. I mean, I'm pretty sure some of his fans, or not some of them, most of his fans who hear this would be like, could I just go back in time?
Right.
Could I just go back in time to that special place where, it's like you get a personal attendance with him and you get to, hang out with him, not just for 1 day or 1 hour, for 3 whole days, Wow.
We discussed The Simpsons. Like, we discussed like, just favorite poets, like, just, yeah, the conversation. It wasn't, it wasn't a speech, it wasn't a prepared thing, which is one of the most interesting things when I do see interviews with Neil Gaiman. It always seems like the last thing he wants to do is plug or talk about it. He just has anecdotes and he just chats with you, and yeah, it's kind of what it was.
Sounds pretty amazing.
I'll stop bragging about when I got to talk to him one time.
No. This is perfectly fine, and this is perfectly amazing. What I want to know is, have you ever been able to meet with him after that? Anytime?
No. Like, it was a chance encounter that was a once in a lifetime thing, and I don't think I'm sure I've been in the same city with him at some point, but he's in a different echelon of people than I am now.
Well, that's true, but you're still a fan of his, and maybe I hope maybe in the future one day if you get to meet him, you can recount and see if he remembers it, and maybe get to see what his recollections of that event were, just because it was such a different time.
It's funny. I saw an interview with George Martin, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, I remember there was a point where this little pasty, British guy came and asked and was pitching this concept of a King of Dreams to me for that book series, and I'm trying to he's got a comic book.
Oh, Wild Cards, yeah, Wild Cards.
And it turns out it was Neil Gaiman. I'm glad I turned him down, kind of thing. And then they go and find Neil Gaiman at the same convention and ask him about that. And it's like, oh my God, you're right. I forgot about that. So yeah, it is kind of cool if you could, touch base with for the anecdote later at a different time. But
yeah,
I think he has bigger things to do, being that he is now the most successful comic writer by far. I don't because he broke out of comics, and is executive producing his own shows. Well, not which he's an executive producer. I'm sure his input is minor. Not minor. That comes out wrong. But he's got shows.
Yeah.
He's got shows. I think he had 3 shows going at the same time based on his work.
Wow. So, okay. Hold on to that. I'm going to talk to you about that at a later point, because I do want to, get your opinion about that as well. But that's really funny that, George R.R. Martin, well, he approached George R.R. Martin for doing Wild Cards. I don't know, Wild Cards has been this, I think George R.R. Martin loves Wild Cards more than he loves, A Song of Ice and Fire. And I say this with all honesty because I've read his, there's in 2003, I believe he released something called RR Retrospective, which was just a giant collection of his short stories and, all novellas and ideas. And in it, you could see the love for comics, but also for his Wild Card universe. And I think he has managed to rope in some pretty big names now as well. Mark Lawrence comes to mind, like he's kind of doing some stories. But as A Song of Ice and Fire, and given where it is, the last book was released more than now 12 years ago. I can't say that, maybe he can devote some of that love to this book series and try to maybe release a 6th book. Anyways.
I mean, there's a video game that came out this week, right? That he was a part of. Go right.
I'm not a gamer. I've heard of that. I don't know what it is. I think it's Elden Ring or something like that. But
yeah.
With me not being a gamer, I have zero interest in all of that. So for me, it's just the books. I mean, even if he were to write some other story, I'll be fine. But the fact that he is not writing, or at least he's not doing what he said, because I think and this is his words, he said that if he could not finish his book by the time he had gone to New Zealand, or he was appearing at a convention in New Zealand, and he literally said this, that if the book is not finished by then, you have my permission to go all misery on me. So again, his words. Nobody has taken him on that. But anyways.
I mean, as a as a fan, I really want, the ending. But as an author, I can totally understand, like, he started that in the 90s. He gets to rest on his laurels. He gets to enjoy, his years. I know you should, pay off to your fans, but like, man, live it right now if you can.
Well, he is, he is. He absolutely and to George R. R. Martin's credit, he lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He even bought up like an old dying theater. He renovated it. He's kind of put up classic movies for it. He has done a lot. Like he is also championing. I'm forgetting her name. The author of Binti. It's kind of like African futuristic sci-fi book series, and it's her name begins with. And I cannot N, and her last name begins with an O, and I cannot. I'm forgetting, but you know whom I'm talking about. But yeah, he's kind of pushing. Yeah, he's pushing HBO for like kind of making a show out of her books. He's kind of promoting other writers as well. But okay, all of that aside, it's been 10 years since last book. I can come. I'll give any writer at least 4 years between each books if they want to take it that, because life happens. All of that aside, let's double the time, 8 years even. That's 2 Olympics, and people train for 2 different Olympics, but it's been 10 years plus, and he's now close to 12, and I don't think he's anywhere near. The Mihir is not going to be untied, and I think he kind of knows it, but he, being the man he is, he's kind of intellectual and stubborn, so probably we'll see.
And also, how are you going to live up to your own to everyone's expectations? I mean, the Rufus syndrome kind of thing of they're sky high. I mean, I think about True Detective, one of my favorite shows. Like, people didn't think it lived up to its own expectations in the original series. Like, it was, because it was so good that like people were like, I was let down by the finale. Like, it was a pitch perfect finale. Like, having come in late and watched it all in one sitting, because it was one sitting, 24 hours, because I couldn't stop. No, it was absolutely perfect. But expectations had gotten so high during its run that it couldn't even live up to its own expectations in the first season, which was perfect. So I understand that.
I don't know how you watch it in one go. It's so bleak, the first season. Like, it is true. Like, I tried watching it. I could only do like 2, maybe 3 episodes at a time. Like, Matthew McConaughey and of course the subject matter, it is so damn bleak. I had to watch some silly Bollywood movies just to kind of refresh my mind and become cheerful at the silliness of it all.
It was actually one of the 3 inspirations for The Woven Ring, by the way, the True Detective. Like, the tone and structure was based entirely on True Detective. So,
sorry, as an aside, what were the other 2?
Last Airbender.
Okay.
And Ken Burns' Civil War.
Okay, yeah. Well,
makes sense now, right?
Yeah, it makes sense now. Well, the last Airbender definitely makes sense because the way you utilize your magic, the Civil War concept, yes, because literally it is a Civil War has happened. The True Detective part, it's not really. I mean, maybe you, from a structural viewpoint, and you being a writer, you'll be able to understand this more. Me being a dumb reader, probably not. But it's not really. It's not in the first book. I can see shades of it, of coming in the second and third book, but not maybe in the first book. But that's okay. I love the series.
So the structure was very much, True Detective. But
awesome.
So Neil Gaiman.
Yes, Neil Gaiman. All right. Going to the next question. What I did want to ask you was that now that the series was finished, he kind of also did, a sequel to it called Sandman Endless Nights, and then also did a prequel to it, I believe Sandman Overture. Did you read those books? If so, what did you think about it?
Yes, I have them over there, but I don't remember them. Yeah, there's Endless Nights. I don't remember it. So, but I own it. So I definitely read it. I don't know. It was a weird thing of like returning to something. Okay, so then I talk about this in the world building book. There's world building capital. Like, you've built this world, you've built this character, like you finished your arc, but like, that's like building a factory to churn out this one story, and then you're just going to let the factory sit there. Like, no, but you're going to go back to it, and because you spent so much time building that stuff. So I understand like wanting to go back to it, but it didn't feel necessary, as most sequels and many, and all prequels, in my opinion, like don't feel necessary. They can like color in some stuff, but it didn't really need coloring in my opinion. It was perfect, and though, I mean, like the Dream Hunter, I think what he did one where it was like a Japanese story, and I think it was Longhand, and I forgot the artist in that one, but it's gorgeous. Like that was good. There was another story in it. That was fine, and they were fine. They were
Mhm.
unnecessary, but they weren't offensive or anything. So you know,
Mhm.
I'm not. This wasn't like Star Wars prequels and you know additional trilogies like which were offensive. Like it was you know inoffensive.
You know,
Hooray!
I have to admit, I still haven't seen Star Wars, any of the films. I know that's such a horrible thing. I never got to see them in India because when I was growing up in India, I knew of them, but like there was no way for me to access it. And then the prequels came along, and everybody just shat on them at that time. And of course, it was like, well, I was like, well, why would I go see a film, which is everybody hates? And now the sequel trilogy, which came out over the last few years, that I know everybody hates. And there's like a distinct camp between some people who like it, some people who hate it outright, like they want it banned or something like that. But one day I think I'm going to see it with my son because I know his friends he's in first grade, he kind of is interested in it, so maybe hopefully I'll start watching it with him, and that'll be enjoyable for me. But I need to watch them at some time.
You should watch them in order. I think they really are the first trilogy, and as far as I'm concerned, that's really there's nothing else. Like they're a cultural touchstone, and they did so much. So even if it's not your thing, like I don't particularly like the Beatles, but they're worth knowing about because they influenced so much. And you can find 3 or 4 good songs in their entire collection somewhere if you really look for them.
Okay. And do you recommend watching them in chronological order or the release order?
Release.
So 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, and maybe 7, 8, 9.
I mean, if you really, if you could also just take a hammer and start hitting your thumb if you really wanted to, but to each their own. Some people like that.
I will keep that in mind. I will first watch the 4, 5, 6 movies, then I'll decide on the prequels. And I'm already not interested in the sequels just because I know how much hatred they've gotten from people, even who loved the originals, like, who had no political affiliation for hating them. They just outright hated them because of the way the characters were apparently misused. So I will keep that in mind, but I will give you some feedback once I do see them.
I look forward to it.
All right, so you kind of have made your decision. You kind of have given me the answer to my next question, which was like, are you a fan of authors returning to their magnum opuses for prequels? I mean, for sequels and for prequels. I want to tweak. I want to tease out that a little bit. So you said you are, at least you can be forgiving of sequels, but you kind of are against prequels almost entirely. Am I correct in summarizing that?
Yes, I'm sure there are prequels that are very good, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I'm not. If you pull it off, if you do it well, then like great. But there's so many things that can go wrong with the prequel. Like, what are you going to do? Say they're going to destroy the world? Like, so you just lost all of dramatic irony. Not because like I know the world is fine.
Yep.
So it's just filling in spaces on the map. Really, filling in backstory. How did this weapon come to be? That kind of stuff, which, if you want, then great, but it doesn't, as a consumer, I'm going to spend money on new stories rather than like a revisit that doesn't ultimately do much for me.
Perfectly fine. And that's a perfectly fine answer because in its truest sense, a prequel, you already know what happened. Like you already know what has happened because you've read the original subject matter. The only prequel that can come to mind, which technically is not a prequel by the definition of a prequel, is Hobbit, to the Lord of the Rings. But of course, The Hobbit was published before, but due to the popularity of The Lord of the Rings, people came to The Hobbit much later than they came, to The Lord of the Rings. So in that sense, maybe that's one small prequel that I can think of which was successful. I don't know if you read the mystery thriller genre, but another, again, technically not a prequel, but again, what happened with Silence of the Lambs and Red Dragon. Silence of the Lambs, Red Dragon, I believe, was released in 1981, it was a critical hit, but again, not so successful. Nobody knew of Thomas Harrison then. Silence of the Lambs came out in 87, 88, huge success, got made into a movie, again, a huge success. And then, of course, people started going back and, reading Red Dragon, which kind of them, became even more popular. Those are the only kind of two books in a way which I can think of are like, the prequels. Well, the prequels were good, but technically were not prequels because they were published earlier.
Yeah.
And someone will correct me in the comments, is that this, the Red Dragon was also made into a movie called Manhunter, but again, not as critically successful, like Silence of the Lambs, didn't win any Oscars.
I want to say Michael Mann directed that.
Yep,
So
yep.
like famous.
Famous, yeah. I mean, and it also starred what's his name, Brian Stryker of not Stryker, Brian, the old guy from Succession.
Oh,
and I don't remember.
Irish actor.
Yep,
I
Brian.
like that you went with the X-Men reference there.
Yes, because he played William Stryker, so that's why I mixed his names, William Stryker.
Oh, I got it. What's Brian Cox?
Yes, him. He, I believe, played. He played Hannibal Lecter in the Manhunter movie, but of course, nobody cares now after Silence of the Lambs and Anthony Hopkins' performance. So I am also. Are you a fan of the new Hannibal TV show, or not new anymore?
I very much enjoyed the first 2 seasons, and that I think the 3rd season, whatever the last season was, kind of went off the rails. And it was, to me, it was just like tone poems at that point. It wasn't even like moving story along. It was like, and then more visuals. Then like I really need a story. So yeah, it was. Yeah, I think it went off the rails, but it was excellent up until then. And Mads Mikkelsen, Chef Kiss, I will watch him read the dictionary in French because he can speak French. Because of course he can.
He can, and I'm going to disagree with a little bit. I feel I love all 3 seasons of the show, and from what I read, originally he had planned, the original 3rd season was just going to be like set in Italy. Again, mild spoilers, but it was going to be the whole season. But of course, I think due to the fact that they knew that the show was coming to an end, they had to compress Red Dragon and that season. So they kind of shortened it and maybe shoehorned both of them together, which perhaps didn't quite make it work as well as they had hoped. But I still love it. Like I in my heart of hearts, I hope that he was, I know he wasn't able to get the Silence of the Lambs rights from the other company, from MGM, I believe. But maybe now that Amazon has brought them, maybe something can happen. I don't know. Hopefully.
Again, it's revisiting your the restaurants you loved as a kid or something. Not quite that, but like rereading something that was just excellent when you were a child, and then like they're not going to recapture it again. I don't think. I think it's best to. It's like Arrested Development. Like let it go. Like it was good. Like Futurama. Like it was perfect in those times. I'm sorry it was cut short. Leave it alone. It's a zombie now. Stop reanimating the dead. It's creepy.
Fair enough. I will agree to that. There's always new properties. There's always new ideas. Go ahead with those rather than just looking at the older stuff. Okay, I do have to ask this to you because I know Netflix has acquired the rights to the Sandman adaptation. I want to hear about that from you, but also from a scriptwriter's viewpoint because you have extensive experience in that department as well. What do you think? And then maybe you could also mention you had mentioned earlier that there's 3 properties of his being made into being adapted for the silver or the TV shows. Can you maybe mention which are the other 2 because I am ignorant of those?
Oh, it was no. I mean, they were on at the same time. American Gods, Lucifer, and totally blanking on the Good Omens.
Oh, Good Omens. Oh, okay, yeah. So
they were concurrently playing at the same time. Like. Not bad, sir. I think American Gods got canceled at this point, and I mean, Gooder Omens is coming out soon, so everyone's excited about that. And Lucifer, I think got canceled and got brought back to Netflix.
By Netflix.
Yeah. So yeah, and that's only based on his version of the character from this one that then got spun off into a comic that then got spun off into a TV show. But yeah, so he had 3 going, and then Sandman's coming, and that's gonna be interesting. Like how is it gonna pull it off? Like I said, like it already has the storyboards. They did the teaser trailer, which is basically the first few pages of it. It looked good. Like the actor looked good in it. They're not quite as white pasty pale as Kat Dennings. No, wait, she's the voice in the Audible.
Yeah.
In mind. I don't know. Like, I'm going into it with an open mind. Like these people are writing on Netflix. They've shown that they can do incredible adaptations if they know they can, like Arcane showed that they can make adaptations of just like, here's some pictures, like, all right, look what I can make out of that. Like, so there was an incredible amount of talent. And so I look forward to it, and I look forward to seeing how they do it. And I look forward to seeing how they deviate from it because, that is one of the things as a comic fan who has seen so many comics come to movies, but even within the comic itself, they bring in a new writer who then takes a whole different spin on the same characters, the same idea, the same concept. And that's interesting. Like, the Alan Moore version of Superman is so much different than the Grant Morrison Superman, and both of them are really, really cool. Some other authors I don't particularly like doing that, but that's, if you're a comic fan, you come from that of knowing that someone else is going to pick up these toys and move them around, these action figures, and move them around in their own stories. And you can either like it or not, but I do like seeing how adaptations are done, and seeing the Wolverine, from the comic versus the Wolverine in this cartoon iteration versus the Hugh Jackman Wolverine versus what the new Wolverine is going to be like, versus Logan, like so many different takes on the character. I as a comic fan, I enjoy that. As a movie fan, I enjoy that. And I hope that the Netflix Sandman is a great, enjoyable story that everyone loves. But it is a different medium than comics. So I give it a lot of leeway because it's the same with the Game of Thrones. Like, I love the books, I love the movies up there, the show. And even the last, like, I don't hate the last season as much as everyone else did. But because, yeah, it's an adaptation. Like, did it hit true every time? Like, no. But you know what it is? It's finished. So yeah, that's one point in its favor.
That is true. Though it's absolute sacrilege that you do not join us all in hating the eighth season. And as an aside, again, because of my abnormal research into that whole thing, both the makers, I believe Dan something and DB Weiss, in one of their original interviews before the show started, they said that if they were given to their heart's content, they would try to adapt it over 80 to 90 episodes. They finished it in 73 episodes, and the rumor is that because they were wanting to do a Star Wars trilogy, and they're tired of this, this fantasy show, and they wanted to go to bigger and better things, and so they wrapped it up, and of course murdered the soul of the series. But anyways, that was I mean, you can make an argument that the show was kind of on its own thing from season 5 onwards, because it kind of started diverging from the books. There was no, I mean, there were these 2 books, the 4th and the 5th one, but they kind of took some points and then of course spun their own thing, and which is why we ended up where we were. So,
but all right, also not discount their success for season 1 and 2. Like, they were able to take voluminous things, pare down entire storylines, and make it absolutely scintillating. So like, they know what they were doing in the adaptation department. And so some people argue, like, once they had to think on their own, they couldn't do it. But I think they did a really, really good job, especially since they were making it up as they went. Like, that's
fair. No, kudos to them. Yeah. That's very true, because the first 4 seasons were absolutely riveting, and they were of course based on the books, but also those books were huge. They were not really made for TV. They kind of adapted them, and they also made it not just for fantasy fans, but for the non-fantasy seeking people. Because I can tell you a shift amidst people, people who had not heard the words George R.R. Martin, A Song of Ice and Fire, people even from India. Like, I remember reading those books in India, and again, nobody cared for them. And then afterwards, they were like, hey, weren't you reading these books? I'm like, yes, I know, I was reading. So they're like, what happens next? I'm like, read the books, or watch the show when it comes out.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was a cultural shift, and I think they helped usher in 10 years of grimdark books and such, and emulating, but yeah, it was a cultural shift. It was a touchstone. Things are different now. Thank goodness for them. They showed that you could adapt it. TV shows. That's why we are in the golden age of fantasy TV at this point. And yeah, I mean, everything's getting picked up right now. That's pretty great. Recently, like, what was it? Wheel of Time came out at the same time. Cowboy Bebop at the same time. Like, and we were like, which one are we going to watch? Like, in the 90s, there was like no fantasy on TV, and there was no science fiction. We watched bad Canadian like rip-offs of X-Men, and thank God Buffy existed. That it was, yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, there was Xena and there was Hercules, but of course they were kind of hammy. They weren't really made with the money and the sets that these shows have. Wheel of Time, like, I'm not a huge fan of the books. I gave up after book 7, but I enjoyed the first season. And of course, there's people who hate on that as well. And I'm kind of coming to that with my next question too. But I thought it was okay. Yes, they did some questionable things. Yes, they had some problems due to COVID and the shooting, which was spread out. But at least again from a non-fantasy perspective, it was interesting enough that I'm pretty sure, like, and the way they ended it, especially the teaser for the season 2, I feel like season 2 might be an improvement. I'm gonna watch it. I didn't watch Cowboy Bebop, but that's just weird. That's why.
Well, I mean, also The Great came out at the same time, and that's what we ended up watching. Which, if you ever have a chance, The Great is phenomenal.
I want to watch that. I know even George R. R. Martin has really commented on that, how good it is. It's like it's based on Russian history, so as to speak.
Yeah, it was a play about Catherine the Great, and the comedy is dark, but it is so rapid fire. It's like 30 Rock rapid fire, which was like the most jokes per minute in a. It's like that fast, that clever, that verbal. It's gorgeous. So we never finished Cowboy Bebop or Wheel of Time because we were watching The Great instead in this household. So yeah.
All right, noted. I will look into it. And again, another fantastic adaptation, not science fiction or fantasy, but I don't know if you've heard of it on Amazon Prime. It's called Reacher. It's based on the Lee Child Reacher books. Again, not a huge fan. I've read some of them. This adaptation is really fantastic. It's 8 episodes long, and it stuck through the books. What they changed, again, things like you mentioned, visual adaptation. They have to change things. And the main guy who played Reacher was fantastic, not unlike Tom Cruise, who was 5'7", and Reacher is supposed to be 6'5", and this guy actually looks 6'5", and is, I think, 6'3" or 6'4". So, well, thank you for that. But coming back to my next question, again, you talked a little bit about this, the fact that there's going to be changes made to the source material because you're adapting it for, a different thing. Given the fan divide, or basically the fan hatred towards, the last few seasons of Game of Thrones, Wheel of Time even, what do you think will be the fans' reactions to Sandman whenever it does premiere? But also, I want to hear from your perspective about, like, if you had to tell a bunch of people who are, like, excited Neil Gaiman fans, given your screenwriting background, given your experience with, how adaptations are made, what would you just tell them to kind of prepare them? And also given for the fact that you are a huge Neil Gaiman Sandman fan.
Oh, that's a lot. To tell people to get them into it, I would tell them bare minimum of like, this is like, I can't explain it. This is epic urban fantasy. Like if you I can't even say like if you like Good Omens, because they're just such a different feel to them, even though it is kind of the same. Actually, I guess Good Omens is, take the comedy out of Good Omens, and that's probably the closest thing you could, which, surprise, surprise. Yeah, like if you like Good Omens, give this a try. If you like American Gods, because they're definitely, they touch on the same feel, but it's so much better. The source material is so much better. I think Gaiman is served better by comics than he is his own prose. Personally speaking, hopefully don't get. but as for fandoms, it's interesting about the fandoms. Like Wheel of Time, I wouldn't have thought. I stopped after book 2 or 3, I think. But then again, I also don't like vaguely medieval fantasy anymore. I've kind of given up on that. That's why I left the fantasy genre for 20 years in the 90s. Is just like, I've seen this, which was one of the reasons that Sandman was so refreshing at the time. It was because it wasn't Dragonlance Tolkien knockoff. It was fantasy, but it was in a world that you knew, and there was something magical around the corner in your own mundane life. It flipped the mundanity of life and added a lot to it. And so I think we might have different fandoms. I don't know if that's gonna, like, because whenever something's sacrosanct and you change anything, like with sacred texts, that kind of, like, people are gonna get mad. This is what it is. This is like the originalist version of it, and how dare you have a character that is 5'3" when they're supposed to be 6'5"? That one I'll give you. That one is a little silly, but yeah, it's how much you cling to your thing matters. Like watching people react to the Lord of the Rings prequel thing that's coming out on Amazon. Like, how dare there be a black dwarf? Tolkien never mentioned a black dwarf, so how could you dare add anything to this? And like, chill out. It's just such a weird reaction to it, and it comes down to like, if they're the traditionalist fan base, like Star Wars, and it's been around for so long, and it was, cornerstone for so many people's entrance into fantasy and sci-fi that whenever they changed something, like it felt wrong to them. I'm not saying that it, that there shouldn't be Asian characters or a female Jedi. Like, oh dear God, how, like clutch your pearls on that one. So I don't know if Sandman's been around long enough to have such a diehard fan base. And then the fact that it is so suffused with, I don't know how to say that, like there's a trans character in the 90s. Like trans characters didn't exist unless they were villains, like in Silence of the Lambs. Like that, it was something that was wrong. And like you had a trans character, that was a main character in it that, and it was just air, and this was 20 years before that became like part of the cultural, when we were talking about trans rights and that kind of thing. And we're still fighting for it, and it's still going on now, but like that was way ahead of its time. And and it wasn't even like, let's explore this. It was just there. Like we have some lesbian characters. Like, so I'm trying to find what the word is I'm looking for, but like I think the fandom's much more accepting of people than other fandoms. And so hopefully that means that they will be less upset when things are changed. Like there's an openness to change, I think, that's involved in the Sandman readership. Or maybe I'm just projecting and hoping that that's the case. So
no,
you're upset by changes to it, maybe.
No, I mean, you do bring up some fascinating points with regards to that. Like, the Sandman world, again, it's newer, not from the 70s or from the 50s, like where Tolkien and Star Wars began, or, at least was released to the general public. It also had diversity of a kind with regards to the character archetypes within the world itself as well, because it also, like you mentioned, it skipped genres, but also skipped timelines. It went to different worlds as well, so you did get to see those characters. With the Tolkien thing, the Rings of Power, I don't get what the Broha is all about. Nobody's seen the show. They've literally seen a few clips, and you can make anything sexy out of, I mean, you should know this. Hollywood can make anything sexy out of even like a dumb, boring movie or any dumb series. Nobody has seen what the series is about. Yes, if the series is epically bad, blame it, talk all about it, let it be released, then talk about it. I don't know. I agree with that, but I was kind of more curious because nowadays I feel like it's with almost every show that comes out, there's always this one camp of these old loyalists who seem to be hating on it for whatever reason. Like they have their valid reasons in their minds, like they diverge from the source materials, or they did this, like you mentioned, like the fact that there's different races, there's elves of different kinds, there's different colors. Of course, Tolkien, when he wrote those books, he was coming from an Anglo-Saxon background. He wrote everybody was white in his books, or at least the default was white. I believe even in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films, like the different races which come to help Sauron, they were the brown skin or like slightly different from. So other races did exist. I don't get it either, but I'm hoping that maybe the reaction to Sandman will not be as bad, unless the series is bad. In which case, yes, everybody can then not literally but figuratively take a shit on it.
Yeah, and I haven't looked at the showrunners of it, and that's a big thing, because I remember the Wheel of Time showrunners. I looked at it and it's like, you guys haven't handled the fantasy. Like you're like Shanara people that you're going to make it cool for people who don't like fantasy, and that is the feel I got from it. Just because like they didn't, not that they didn't handle it like carefully, but it didn't feel like they knew what they were doing. It looked like they were trying to make something else out of fantasy. It's like watching certain comic book writers who, there's one particular, I don't think he actually likes the X-Men, and he's writing the X-Men, and it's weird of like, you can tell when they're trying to fix it, and it felt like they were trying to fix it instead of really enjoying to work with it. And so I don't know, and I don't know who the showrunners for Sandman are, so I haven't looked at their credits to say if I think they can pull it off or not.
I believe so. To answer your original question, for Wheel of Time, it was Rafe Judkins. He, as far as I know, as far as I recall, he hasn't really this is his first big show time, like as a showrunner gig. And with Sandman, of course, so with Wheel of Time, Brandon Sanderson and Robert Jordan's widow was involved as well. With Sandman, I believe it's been the showrunner is this guy, person called Alan Heinberg. I haven't heard of him, but of course I'm nobody. There's David S. Goyer involved. He was involved with the DC side of the films. I believe he was a scriptwriter for.
Oh, no, I know Goyer. He did
Batman, the Blade movies, partially. The Batman trilogy.
Did he do Dark City? Is he the Dark City guy?
I'm not sure. I think that was Dark City. You know what? Actually, it might be. I might be wrong, but that name is known to me because he's been associated with a lot of DC movies, the good and the bad ones as well.
Yeah. Well, if it's an executive producer, then you wonder how much. Oh, James McAvoy is. Oh, hey. Now I'm looking at it on IMDb for the first time, obviously. Stars Neil Gaiman. Does it star him, really? Yeah. Okay. I haven't been on this thing in a while. All right, sorry, we'll stop looking at the. It depends on the showrunners if they know the material or not, if they know how to adapt it, and if they have not reverence for it, but if they speak the genre fluently as a first or second language, rather than having to stop and think about and go conjugate their verb in their head every time, which is what I felt like Wheel of Time was. Not to poop on it too much, but it was not the best.
Not the best. That's true, and that is a valid criticism of it. Like it felt choppy as well. It did some strange things. So we'll see. Hopefully, the second season might pick it up. I'm pretty much excited after talking to you about the Sandman. I wasn't so curious about it. Like Netflix does have a lot of money; they're pumping a lot of money into various things. But now I'm excited to see what they do with it. All right, coming back to Neil Gaiman's Sandman books, in 2019 there was the 30th anniversary. He kind of opened up the Sandman universe because he kind of allowed other writers to play in his wheelbarrow. I'm forgetting the books which were released, but there was a few stories which he allowed other writers. He, of course, under his overview, but they were given the chance to write about it as well. Let's say you have the opportunity. Let's say you meet Neil Gaiman after a long time. He remembers you. You kind of talk to him. You tell him all about these books and everything. And he says, "Okay, do you want to write in the Sandman universe?" What would your answer be? And if yes, what would you want to write about?
So in this case, I've read the when you opened it up, Kirian something, who did Die, the comic, I very much enjoyed, did it. And it was interesting, but it was kind of off. And, there were things like, I just didn't like what they did with Merv. Like, don't mess with Merv. Like, he was Merv. Like, so, there were things that, it was weird. You don't want to, those are someone else's toys. You're getting secondhand toys, which is cool. Like, my son has a lot of secondhand toys that are so much better than buying them every time. But then you pick them up and move them around. It's like The Magicians. I don't particularly like it because it feels like he's playing with someone else's toys and he's playing with them unkindly. So I don't want to fall into that. As much as I like Kieran's run, I definitely read it. It was interesting. The books of magic, like we're used to having people spin stuff up, Lucifer, that kind of thing. So, but that would be like, do you want to write a Star Wars story? Like, I haven't enjoyed Star Wars for many years, but yes, I'm going to jump at that chance. Like, I haven't enjoyed The Simpsons in decades, but if I could be a voice on it, if I had a guest star, of course I'd jump at that. So, but I would want to do it slightly off to the side. Like, I wouldn't want to deal with an overarching story to that world. I would want to do a story off to the side. And it partially based on the conversation, with Neil Gaiman 25 years ago. I really want to do something with the fashion thing, which I don't know if you even remember it, because I think she was only mentioned twice in there.
I do not.
The fashion thing was like, I think once he escapes from hell, not from hell, but at one point he like runs into the fashion thing, which looks like she's based on Madonna, because to date it, what it is. Even though she is still around and still fashioning, but like, and so like, can you get some clothes from the fashion thing? And that's all it's mentioned, is like the fashion. I think it gets one more mention, and I asked him like the fashion thing. He's like, I wish I could have done more with that. And so personally speaking, I would like to do a story with like the fashion thing and what it is when fashion is eating itself constantly, and what do you do when you have to adapt all the time. And I don't know, that'd just be such a neat story within the world where you can sort of interact with it, but it's its own self-contained story within the world involving the fashion thing. and yeah, and moving it from a character from the 90s that was very, barely mentioned, to how much the fashion has changed since then. And in the conversation I had with Neil Gaiman 25 years ago, like he was really cool because he was talking about all things that come into the mainstream are things at the extreme that just have their edges buffered off. And he was like, I think goth is going to become like the next thing. I think, and it was, and it became the fashion, but as emo. 5 years later, they took the goth out and made it emo, and then it was an all hot topic. So like he understood fashion and mainstreamness, and so to kind of do that with the fashion thing, be able to look at an overarching story of fashion, which is look at me, this is the least thing that I do with fashion, so yeah, I don't know, that would be the story that I would want to do.
That honestly sounds pretty cool. I don't know if you, in the future, maybe if you ever get a chance, but even if it's not set in the Sandman universe, I feel you should write about it. Like, you can make it your own thing. It doesn't have to be about, Sandman or the dream and everything. You can write your own thing about it, because I would love to see a twist on this whole thing. Like, beginning from drawing from imaginary world and what happens next, because that sounds pretty cool, to be honest with you.
Oh, I'm blushing.
All right. Well, Matthew, I wanted to thank you again so much for, this so much wonderful conversation. Lastly, before I let you go, I wanted to ask you just one last thing. If you had to, and I know you kind of mentioned this a little bit in the start, but let's say if you had, anybody who's not read Sandman, the comic, and now, of course, with the adaptation coming on, what would you say to them just to make them pick it up? It doesn't have to be, like, this is why you need to read it, but it's just like a quick blurb, to put you on the spot.
Oh man, that's like, it's easier to blurb someone else's stuff. I would say check this out. This is like the human condition told by Inhumans. This is like bringing the fantasy to the mundane. This is something that just makes you feel more human. It makes you look at your world in a different way. By telling the story of dreams, which is the story of us, because we dream and we're the only ones that make stories as far as we know so far. And to look at that, it gives a sense of wonder. And I think that is what is the selling point to it after all these years, and why people keep returning to it. That's why I do.
That's perfect. I know not just you, but millions of others definitely do. And now with the upcoming, Netflix adaptation, it's going to, go to a wider audience as well. It's going to attract even more fans. So hopefully this, this dream of Neil Gaiman will keep on, expanding. And maybe, just maybe, I'm going to keep my fingers crossed, he happens to see this and he happens to hear, remember you. So maybe you can write about the fashion thing in the small corner of the Sandman universe. All right. Well, Matthew, I again want to thank you so much for your time today. I know you're a busy person, and so thank you so very much. I'll be adding links to Matthew's books, his website down below. And I want to wish you all the very best for your upcoming re-release of the Souls Harvest series. Lucas and I are waiting for the 4th book. So, do you want to give maybe a quick update about what and when, how the re-release will be going forward?
Yeah, so April 6th, 2022, the first book will come back out. I've got new covers. I really need to go put it up on Amazon. I just got my first arc back from it today, so that's great. Second book is already ready to go, and that'll be 2 months later. Third book is almost done with the new re-edit, and that'll come out. And so that's August? No.
April, June.
And August, and then October should be book 4. I just got a new show, as I said. So like every time that's my favorite joke of like, how do you make God laugh? You make a plan. And so like, I'm finally gonna get this series out, and then like a show falls in my lap, and like, oh dang, poor me. I have to go get, so anyways, yeah. No, I think I can pull it off unless something absolutely insane happens. It will definitely come out this year. I've not said that 2 years ago. Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that. And so for the people who were, are a little bit curious, it's the Woven Ring, the Glass Dagger, and the Imbued Lock Blade, which is books 1, 3, and 2. That's what Matthew was mentioning that he'll be releasing in April, June, and August. And the 4th book, which will be coming out, that concludes the saga of Saul's Harvest, will be coming out in October. Do you want to maybe let the viewers know what the title may be, or is it not yet decided? And it's completely fine if it's not decided, if you don't want to talk about it.
Totally. It's the Shattered Sphere, because the Shattered Sphere is because alliteration or something, but I have the. So, and it's always an object that's really important in the story itself. So the Shattered Sphere, and oh my goodness, it might be about the world itself. I don't know. Yeah. So it's a good title, I think. Maybe not. We'll see.
Well, it sounds fantastic. It already is kind of giving me a clue about what the story, where it's going to be. And of course, for the readers who do know this, Matthew kind of does like a deep dive into the past of one character in each of the stories. So in all the 3 books before, he has dived into a particular character. And with the 4th book, I'm not going to ask you this, Matthew, so don't worry. I have my guess as to who that deep dive, might be about. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed. I'm going to wait for the ARC to arrive whenever it does arrive. No pressure.
No, you're wrong. I just want to tell you that. But go on.
Oh, well, I haven't told you who I think it will be. So I will only tell you when the ARC arrives whether I was right or wrong. I'll be honest about it. I will tell you that this is what I thought it will be. And if it is, great. If not, I'm still going to have fun with it. So Thank you again. I will be adding this video soon. And so just wanted to thank you again for your time and for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you for having me out. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. And this was exceptional. This has brightened my day. This will brighten my week and probably my year.
Well, on that cheery note, we'll be signing off. Thank you again. Bye, everybody.